Remix. To combine or edit existing materials to produce something new. The term remix originally applied to music. It rose to prominence late last century during the heyday of hip-hop, the first popular music form to incorporate sampling from existing recordings. Early example, the Sugar Hill Gang samples the bass riff from Chic's Good Times in the 1979 hit Rapper's Delight.
Now what you hear is not a test, I'm rapping to the beat. And me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet.
Since then, that same bass line has been sampled dozens of times.
Good life, no stripe, real nice. And I'm a papa, my son Trey.
Eu sou velho caderninho de telefone, com o nome e o número de monte de mulher. E ele vai ligar.
Skip ahead to the present and anybody can remix anything. Music, video, photos, whatever, and distribute it globally pretty much instantly. You don't need expensive tools, you don't need a distributor, you don't even need skills. Remixing is a folk art. Anybody can do it. Yet these techniques, collecting material, combining it, transforming it, are the same ones used at any level of creation. You could even say that everything is a remix. To explain, let's start in England in 1968. Jimmy Page recruits John Paul Jones, Robert Plant, and John Bonham to form Led Zeppelin. They play extremely loud blues music that will soon be known as, wait. Let's start in Paris in 1961. William Burroughs coins the term heavy metal in the novel The Soft Machine, a book composed using the cut-up technique, taking existing writing and literally chopping it up and rearranging it. So in 1961, William Burroughs not only invents the term heavy metal, the brand of music Zeppelin and a few other groups would pioneer, he also produces an early remix. Back to Zeppelin. By the mid-1970s, Led Zeppelin are the biggest touring rock band in America. Yet many critics and peers label them as rip-offs. The case goes like this. The opening and closing sections of Bringin' On Home are lifted from a tune by Willie Dixon entitled, not coincidentally, Bringin' On Home.
Got my ticket, got that load. I done bought my ticket, I got my load.
The Lemon Song lifts numerous lyrics from Howlin' Wolf's Killin' Floor.
I should have quit you. I should have quit you a long time ago.
Black Mountainside lifts its melody from Black Waterside, a traditional arranged by Bert Jansch. Dazed and Confused features different lyrics but is clearly an uncredited cover of the same titled song by Jake Holmes. Oddly enough, Holmes filed suit over 40 years later in 2010.
Been dazed and confused for so long, it's not true.
I'm dazed and confused, hanging on by a thread.
And the big one, Stairway to Heaven, pulls its opening from Spirit's Taurus. Zeppelin toured with Spirit in 1968, 3 years before Stairway was released. Zeppelin clearly copied a lot of other people's material. But that alone isn't unusual. Only two things distinguish Zeppelin from their peers. Firstly, when Zeppelin used someone else's material, they didn't attribute songwriting to the original artist. Most British blues groups were recording lots of covers, but unlike Zeppelin, they didn't claim to have written them. Secondly, Zeppelin didn't modify their versions enough to claim they were original. Many bands knock off acts that came before them, but they tend to emulate the general sound rather than specific lyrics or melodies. Zeppelin copied without making fundamental changes. So these two things, covers, performances of other people's material, and knockoffs, copies that stay within legal boundaries, these are long-standing examples of legal remixing. This stuff accounts for almost everything the entertainment industry produces. Wait, one last thing. In the wake of their enormous success, Led Zeppelin went from the copier to the copied. First in the 70s with groups like Aerosmith and Heart and Boston, then during the 80s heavy metal craze, and on into the era of sampling. Here's the beats from When the Levee Breaks, getting sampled and remixed. In Zeppelin's defense, they never sued anybody. Perhaps it's because movies are so massively expensive to make. Perhaps it's because graphic novels, TV shows, video games, books, and the like are such rich sources of material. Or perhaps it's because audiences just prefer the familiar. Whatever the reason, most box office hits rely heavily on existing material. Of the 10 highest grossing films per year from the last 10 years, 74 out of 100 are either sequels or remakes of earlier films or adaptations of comic books, video games, books, and so on. Transforming the old into the new is Hollywood's greatest talent. At this point, we've got 3 sequels to a film adapted from a theme park attraction. We've got a movie musical based on a musical which was based on a movie. We've got 2 sequels to a film that was adapted from an animated TV show based on a line of toys. We've got a movie based on 2 books, one of which was based on a blog, which was inspired by the other book that was adapted into the film.
Julie and Julia.
Do you follow? We've got 11 Star Trek films, 12 Friday the 13th, and 23 James Bonds. We've got stories that have been told, retold, transformed, referenced, and subverted since the dawn of cinema. We've seen vampires morph from hideous monsters to caped bedroom invaders, to campy jokes, to sexy hunks, to sexier hunks. Of the few box office hits that aren't sequels, remakes, or adaptations, the word original wouldn't spring to mind to describe them. These are genre movies, and they stick to pretty standard templates. Genres then break up into subgenres with their own, even more specific conventions. So within the category of horror films, we have subgenres like slasher, zombie, creature feature, and of course, torture porn. All have standard elements that are appropriated, transformed, and subverted. Let's use the biggest film of the decade as an example. Now, it's not a sequel, remake, or adaptation, but it is a genre film, sci-fi, and most tellingly, it's a member of a tiny subgenre where sympathetic white people feel bad about all the murder, pillaging, and annihilation being done on their behalf. I call this subgenre Sorry About Colonialism. I'm talking about movies like Dances with Wolves, The Last Samurai, The Last of the Mohicans, Dune, Lawrence of Arabia, A Man Called Horse, and even Ferngully and Pocahontas. Films are built on other films, as well as on books, TV shows, actual events, plays, whatever. This applies to everything from the lowliest genre film right on up to revered indie fare. And it even applies to massively influential blockbusters, the kinds of films that reshape pop culture. Which brings us to... Even now, Star Wars endures as a work of impressive imagination, but many of its individual components are as recognizable as the samples in a remix. The foundation for Star Wars comes from Joseph Campbell. He popularized the structures of myth in his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Star Wars follows the outline of the monomyth, which consists of stages like the Call to Adventure, Supernatural Aid, the Belly of the Whale, the Road of Trials, the Meeting with the Goddess, and a bunch more. Also huge influences were the Flash Gordon serials from the 30s and Japanese director Akira Kurosawa. Star Wars plays much like an updated version of Flash Gordon, right down to the soft wipes and the opening titles design. From Kurosawa, we get Masters of Spiritual Martial Arts, a low-ranking bickering duo, more soft wipes, a Beneath the Floorboards Hideaway, and a boastful baddie getting his arm chopped off.
You just watch yourself. We're wanted men. I have the death sentence on 12 systems.
War films and westerns were also huge sources for Star Wars. The scene where Luke discovers his slaughtered family resembles this scene from The Searchers. And the scene where Han Solo shoots Greedo resembles this scene from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The climactic airstrikes in the Dam Busters, 633 Squadron, and the bridges at Toko-Ri play very similarly to the run on the Death Star. And in many cases, existing shots were even used as templates for Star Wars special effects. There's also many other elements clearly derived from various films. We have a Tin Man, like the Tin Woman in Metropolis, a couple shots inspired by 2001, a grab the girl and swing scene like this one in The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, a holographic projection kind of like the one in Forbidden Planet, a rally resembling this one in Triumph of the Will, and cute little robots much like those in Silent Running. George Lucas collected materials, he combined them, he transformed them. Without the films that preceded it, there could be no Star Wars. Creation requires influence. Everything we make is a remix of existing creations, our lives, and the lives of others. As Isaac Newton once said, we stand on the shoulders of giants, which is what he was doing when he adapted that saying from Bernard de Chartres. In Part 3, we'll further explore this idea and chart the blurry boundary between the original and the unoriginal. George Lucas was the most movie-saturated filmmaker of his era, but that baton has since been passed to Quentin Tarantino's remix master thesis is Kill Bill, which is probably the closest thing Hollywood has to a mashup. Packed with elements pulled from countless films, Kill Bill raises filmic sampling to new heights of sophistication. The killer nurse scene in particular is almost entirely a recombination of elements from existing films. The basic action is the same as this scene from Black Sunday, where a woman disguised as a nurse attempts to murder a patient with a syringe of red fluid. Daryl Hannah's eye patch is a nod to the lead character in They Call Her One Eye, and the tune she's whistling is taken from the 1968 thriller Twisted Nerve.
No, hold tight. Hold tight.
Capping it off, the split screen effect is modeled on techniques used by Brian De Palma in an assortment of films, including Carrie. The act of creation is surrounded by a fog of myths. Myths that creativity comes via inspiration, that original creations break the mold, that they're the products of geniuses, and appear as quickly as electricity can heat a filament. But creativity isn't magic. It happens by applying ordinary tools of thought to existing materials. And the soil from which we grow our creations is something we scorn and misunderstand, even though it gives us so much, and that's copying. Put simply, copying is how we learn. We can't introduce anything new until we're fluent in the language of our domain, and we do that through emulation. For instance, all artists spend their formative years producing derivative work. Bob Dylan's first album contained 11 cover songs. Richard Pryor began his stand-up career doing a not very good imitation of Bill Cosby. And Hunter S. Thompson retyped The Great Gatsby just to get the feel of writing a great novel. Nobody starts out original. We need copying to build a foundation of knowledge and understanding. And after that, things can get interesting. After After we've grounded ourselves in the fundamentals through copying, it's then possible to create something new through transformation, taking an idea and creating variations. This is time-consuming tinkering, but it can eventually produce a breakthrough. James Watt created a major improvement to the steam engine because he was assigned to repair a Thomas Newcomen steam engine. He then spent 12 years developing his version. Christopher Latham Scholes modeled his typewriter keyboard on a piano. This design slowly evolved over 5 years into the QWERTY layout we still use today. And Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb. His first patent was improvement in electric lamps, but he did produce the first commercially viable one after trying 6,000 different materials for the filament. These are all major advances, but they're not original ideas so much as tipping points in a continuous line of invention by many different people. But the most dramatic results can happen when ideas are combined. By connecting ideas together, creative leaps can be made, producing some of history's biggest breakthroughs. Johann Gutenberg's printing press was invented around 1440, but almost all its components had been around for centuries. Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company didn't invent the assembly line, interchangeable parts, or even the automobile itself, but they combined all these elements in 1908 to produce the first mass-market car, the Model T. And the internet slowly grew over several decades as networks and protocols merged. It finally hit critical mass in 1991 when Tim Berners-Lee added the World Wide Web. These are the basic elements of creativity: copy, transform, and combine. And the perfect illustration of all these at work is the story of the devices we're using right now. So let's travel back to the dawn of the personal computer revolution and look at the company that started it all. Xerox. Xerox invented the modern personal computer in the early 70s. The Alto was a mouse-driven system with a graphical user interface. Bear in mind that a popular personal computer of this era was operated with switches, and if you flipped them in the right order, you got to see blinking lights. The Alto was way ahead of its time. Eventually, Apple got a load of the Alto and later released not one, but 2 computers with graphical interfaces, the Lisa and its more successful follow-up, the Macintosh. The Alto was never a commercial product, but Xerox did release a system based on it in 1981, the Star 8010. 2 years before the Lisa, 3 years before the Mac. It was the Star and the Alto that served as the foundation for the Macintosh. The Xerox Star used a desktop metaphor with icons for documents and folders. It had a pointer, scroll bars, and pop-up menus. These were huge innovations, and the Mac copied every one of them. But it was the first combination it incorporated that set the Mac on a path towards long-term success. Apple aimed to merge the computer with the household appliance. The Mac was to be a simple device, like a TV or a stereo. This was unlike the Star, which was intended for professional use, and vastly different from the cumbersome command-based systems that dominated the era. The Mac was for the home, and this produced a cascade of transformations. Firstly, Apple removed one of the buttons on the mouse to make its novel pointing device less confusing. Then they added the double click for opening files. The Star used a separate key to open files. The Mac also let you drag icons around and move and resize windows. The Star didn't have drag and drop. You moved and copied files by selecting an icon, pressing a key, then clicking a location. And you resized windows with a menu. The Star and the Alto both featured pop-up menus, but because the location of these would move around the screen, the user had to continually reorient. The Mac introduced the menu bar, which stayed in the same place no matter what you were doing. And the Mac added the trash can to make deleting files more intuitive and less nerve-wracking. And lastly, through compromise and clever engineering, Apple managed to pare the Mac's price down to $2,500. Still pretty expensive, but much cheaper than the $10,000 Lisa or the $17,000 Star. But what started it all was the graphical interface merged with the idea of the computer as household appliance. The Mac is a demonstration of the explosive potential of combinations. The Star and the Alto, on the other hand, are the products of years of elite research and development. They're a testament to the slow power of transformation. But of course, they too contain the work of others. The Alto and the Star are evolutionary branches that lead back to the NLS system, which introduced Windows and the mouse, to Sketchpad, the first interactive drawing application, and even back to the Memex, a concept resembling the modern PC, decades before it was possible. What if Xerox never decided to pursue the graphical interface? Or Thomas Edison found a different trade? What if Tim Berners-Lee never got the funding to develop the World Wide Web? Would our world be different? Would we be further behind? History seems to tell us things wouldn't be so different. Whenever there's a major breakthrough, there's usually others on the same path. Maybe a bit behind, maybe not behind at all. Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz both invented calculus around 1684. Charles Darwin proposed the theory of evolution by natural selection, but Alfred Russel Wallace had pretty much the same idea at pretty much the same time. And Alexander Graham Bell and Elisha Gray filed patents for the telephone on the same day. We call this multiple discovery, the same innovation emerging from different places. Science and invention is riddled with it, but it can also happen in the arts. In film, for instance, we had 3 Coco Chanel movies released within 9 months of each other. Around 1999, we had a quartet of sci-fi movies about artificial reality. Even Charlie Kaufman's unusually original film, Synecdoche, New York, bears an uncanny resemblance to Tom McCarthy's novel, Remainder. Both are the stories of men who suddenly become wealthy and start recreating moments of their lives, even going so far as to recreate the recreations. And actually, the video you're watching, was written just before The New Yorker published a Malcolm Gladwell story about Apple, Xerox, and the nature of innovation. We're all building with the same materials. Sometimes by coincidence we get similar results, but sometimes innovations just seem inevitable. The interdependence of our creativity has been obscured by powerful cultural ideas, but technology is now exposing this connectedness. We're struggling legally, ethically, and artistically to deal with these implications, and that's our final episode, Part 4. The genes in our bodies can be traced back over 3.5 billion years to a single organism, Luca, the last universal common ancestor. As Luca reproduced, its genes copied and copied and copied and copied. Sometimes with mistakes, they transformed. Over time, this produced every one of the billions of species of life on Earth. Some of these adopted sexual reproduction, combining the genes of individuals, and altogether, the best adapted life forms prospered. This is evolution. Copy, transform, and combine. And culture evolves in a similar way, but the elements aren't genes, they're memes, ideas, behaviors, skills. Memes are copied, transformed, and combined. And the dominant ideas of our time are the memes that spread the most. This is social evolution. Copy, transform, and combine. It's who we are, it's how we live, and of course, it's how we create. Our new ideas evolve from the old ones. But our system of law doesn't acknowledge the derivative nature of creativity. Instead, ideas are regarded as property, as unique and original lots with distinct boundaries. But ideas aren't so tidy. They're layered, they're interwoven, they're tangled. And when the system conflicts with the reality, the system starts to fail. For almost our entire history, ideas were free. The works of Shakespeare, Gutenberg, and Rembrandt could be openly copied and built upon. But the growing dominance of the market economy, where the products of our intellectual labors are bought and sold, produced an unfortunate side effect. Let's say a guy invents a better light bulb. His price needs to cover not just the manufacturing cost, but also the cost of inventing the thing in the first place. Now let's say a competitor starts manufacturing a competing copy. The competitor doesn't need to cover those development costs, so his version can be cheaper. The bottom line, original creations can't compete with the price of copies. In the United States, the introduction of copyrights and patents was intended to address this imbalance. Copyrights covered media, patents covered inventions. Both aim to encourage the creation and proliferation of new ideas by providing a brief and limited period of exclusivity, a period where no one else could copy your work. This gave creators a window in which to cover their investment and earn a profit. After that, their work entered the public domain, where it could spread far and wide and be freely built upon. And it was this that was the goal, a robust public domain, an affordable body of ideas, products, arts, and entertainment available to all. The core belief was in the common good, what would benefit everyone. But over time, the influence of the market transformed this principle beyond recognition. Influential thinkers proposed that ideas are a form of property, and this conviction would eventually yield a new term, intellectual property. This was a meme that would multiply wildly, thanks in part to a quirk of human psychology known as loss aversion. Simply put, we hate losing what we've got. People tend to place a much higher value on losses than on gains, so the gains we get from copying the work of others don't make a big impression. But when it's our ideas being copied, we perceive this as a loss and we get territorial. For instance, Disney made extensive use of the public domain. Stories like Snow White, Pinocchio, and Alice in Wonderland were all taken from the public domain. But when it came time for the copyright of Disney's early films to expire, they lobbied to have the term of copyright extended. Artist Shepard Fairey has frequently used existing art in his work. This practice came to a head when he was sued by the Associated Press for basing his famous Obama Hope poster on their photo. Nonetheless, when it was his imagery used in a piece by Baxter Orr, Fairey threatened to sue. And lastly, Steve Jobs was sometimes boastful about Apple's history of copying.
We have, always been shameless about stealing great ideas.
But he harbored deep grudges against those who dared to copy Apple. I'm going to destroy Android because it's a stolen product. I'm willing to go thermonuclear war on this. When we copy, we justify it. When others copy, we vilify it. Most of us have no problem with copying, as long as we're the ones doing it. So with a blind eye toward our own mimicry and propelled by faith in markets and ownership, intellectual property swelled beyond its original scope, with broader interpretations of existing laws, new legislation, new realms of coverage, and alluring rewards. In 1981, George Harrison lost a $1.5 million case for subconsciously copying the doo-wop hit He's So Fine in his ballad, My Sweet Lord. Prior to this, plenty of songs sounded much more like other songs without ending up in court. Ray Charles created the prototype for soul music when he based I Got a Woman on the gospel song It Must Be Jesus.
There's a man be Jesus, going around be Jesus, taking names be Jesus. Oh Lord, say I got a woman way over town, good to me. Oh yeah.
Starting in the late 90s, a series of new copyright laws and regulations began to be introduced, and many more are in the works. The most ambitious in scope are trade agreements. Because these are treaties and not laws, they can be negotiated in secret, with no public input and no congressional approval. In 2011, ACTA was signed by President Obama, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, currently being written in secret, aims to spread even stronger U.S.-style protections around the world. Of course, when the United States itself was a developing economy, it refused to sign treaties and had no protection for foreign creators. Charles Dickens famously complained about America's bustling book piracy market, calling it a horrible thing that scoundrel booksellers should grow rich. Patent coverage made the leap from physical inventions to virtual ones, most notably software. But this is not a natural transition. A patent is a blueprint for how to make an invention. Software patents are more like a loose description of what something would be like if it actually was invented. And software patents are written in the broadest possible language to get the broadest possible protection. The vagueness of these terms can sometimes reach absurd levels. For example, information manufacturing machine, which covers anything computer-like, or material object, which covers pretty much anything. The fuzziness of software patents boundaries has turned the smartphone industry into one giant turf war. 62% of all patent lawsuits are now over software. The estimated wealth lost is $500 billion. The expanding reach of intellectual property has introduced more and more possibilities for opportunistic litigation, suing to make a buck. Two new species evolved whose entire business model is lawsuits: sample trolls and patent trolls. These are corporations that don't actually produce anything. They acquire a library of intellectual property rights, then litigate to earn profits. And because legal defense is hundreds of thousands of dollars in copyright cases and millions in patents, their targets are usually highly motivated to settle out of court. The most famous sample troll is Bridgeport Music, which has filed hundreds of lawsuits. In 2005, they scored an influential court decision over this 2-second sample. That's it. And not only was the sample short, it was virtually unrecognizable. This verdict essentially rendered any kind of sampling, no matter how small, infringing. The sample-heavy musical collages of hip-hop's golden age are now impossibly expensive to create. Now, patent trolls are most common back in that troubled realm of software. And perhaps the most inexplicable case is that of Paul Allen. He's one of the founders of Microsoft, he's a billionaire, he's an esteemed philanthropist who's pledged to give away much of his fortune, and he claims basic web features like related links, alerts, and recommendations were invented by his long-defunct company. So the self-proclaimed idea man sued pretty much all of Silicon Valley in 2010, and he did this despite no lack of fame or fortune. So to recap, the full picture looks like this. We believe that ideas are property, and we're excessively territorial when we feel that property belongs to us. Our laws then indulge this bias with ever-broadening protections and massive rewards. Meanwhile, huge legal fees encourage defendants to pay up and settle out of court. It's a discouraging scenario, and it begs the question, what now? The belief in intellectual property has grown so dominant, it's pushed the original intent of copyrights and patents out of the public consciousness. But that original purpose is still right there in plain sight. The Copyright Act of 1790 is entitled An Act for the Encouragement of Learning. The Patent Act is to promote the progress of useful arts. The exclusive rights these acts introduced were a compromise for a greater purpose. The intent was to better the lives of everyone by incentivizing creativity and producing a rich public domain, a shared pool of knowledge open to all. But exclusive rights themselves came to be considered the point, so they were strengthened and expanded. And the result hasn't been more progress or more learning, it's been more squabbling and more abuse. We live in an age with daunting problems. We need the best ideas possible, we need them now, we need them to spread fast. The common good is a meme that was overwhelmed by intellectual property. It needs to spread again. If the meme prospers, our laws, our norms, our society, they all transform. That's social evolution, and it's not up to governments, or corporations, or lawyers. It's up to us.